Between 1500 and 1900, European powers carved up an entire continent. They conquered kingdoms that had stood for centuries. They enslaved millions. They erased cultures, languages, and entire civilizations. But there was one place they couldn't touch. One kingdom that looked at Europe's guns, armies, and empires and said, "No, this is the story of Ethiopia, the African kingdom that never fell, and the secret weapon that kept them free for 400 years. In 1868, the British Empire, the most powerful military force on earth, invades Ethiopia. Their target is Emperor Tewodros II, who had imprisoned several British diplomats after feeling disrespected by Queen Victoria. Britain sent 13,000 soldiers. They had modern rifles, artillery, and even elephants to carry equipment across the treacherous mountains. They spent millions of pounds on a single campaign that's billions in today's money. They marched through the Ethiopian highlands, confident of an easy victory. Then they reached the fortress of Magdala. What happened next shocked the world. Tewodros, surrounded and completely outgunned, didn't surrender. Instead, he gave one final, incredible order: release all the hostages unharmed. Then, he put a pistol to his own head and pulled the trigger. His final words were, "A foreigner will never rule Ethiopia." The British took the fortress. But here's the part of the story that's rarely told. They couldn't keep it. The Ethiopian resistance was so fierce, the terrain so hostile, and the logistics so impossible, that the British army withdrew within just a few months. They had won the battle, but they knew they could never win the war. Ethiopia remained free. Decades later, Italy thought they could do better. In 1896, Italian forces invaded Ethiopia, planning to colonize it just like they'd colonized neighboring Eritrea and Somalia. They came with 20,000 troops, modern weapons, and that classic European confidence. But Emperor Menelik II was waiting. The Battle of Adwa, March 1, 1896. This is one of the most important battles in human history that nobody teaches in school. Menelik had done something unprecedented. He'd united Ethiopia's rival kingdoms, a feat Europeans had dismissed as impossible. He'd modernized his army, strategically purchasing advanced weapons from France and Russia. And he had diligently studied European military tactics. When Italy attacked, they were expecting primitive warriors with spears. Instead, they faced 100,000 disciplined Ethiopian soldiers armed with modern rifles and artillery, using European tactics against European invaders. The Italians were annihilated. They suffered 40% casualties. High-ranking officers were captured. Their commander fled in disgrace. Italy sued for peace and was forced to recognize Ethiopian sovereignty. For the first time, an African kingdom had defeated a European colonial power in open battle. The victory sent shockwaves through the entire world. Black newspapers in America celebrated. Revolutionaries in the Caribbean were inspired. And the colonial powers learned a terrifying lesson: Ethiopia was untouchable. But this raises the question nobody asks: how did Ethiopia survive when everyone else fell? The answer isn't what you think. It wasn't just military might. It was something far more sophisticated, something European colonizers couldn't understand or combat. Ethiopia had 3 secret weapons. Weapon 1: geography. Ethiopia is a natural fortress. It's a land of mountains 15,000 feet high and deep, winding valleys. The terrain is so hostile that invading armies would hemorrhage supplies and soldiers long before they ever reached a strategic target. Every single invasion was a logistical nightmare. Weapon 2: diplomacy. Ethiopian emperors played the European powers against each other like chess masters. They would buy weapons from France, get military training from Russia, and sign treaties with Britain, all while skillfully avoiding giving any of them colonial control. And weapon 3, this is the big one, was identity. Ethiopia is one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. They had been practicing Christianity since 330 AD, long before most of Europe. So when Europeans arrived with their claims of civilizing Africans, Ethiopians could pull out ancient manuscripts proving their church was older than the Vatican. They had their own unique alphabet, their own ancient language, Ge'ez, their own architectural tradition, with magnificent rock-hewn churches carved from solid stone. And they had their own claim to biblical legitimacy, believing they were descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Europeans simply couldn't use their usual colonial playbook. They couldn't claim Ethiopians were primitive or uncivilized. They couldn't justify colonization on religious grounds. Ethiopia didn't just resist with weapons. They resisted with culture. They resisted with undeniable proof that African civilization was as old and as sophisticated as anything Europe could claim. And when Italy tried one more time in 1935, this time under Mussolini with modern planes and chemical weapons, Ethiopia fell. For 5 years, from 1936 to 1941, Italy occupied the country. Victory at last, right? Wrong. Italy never truly controlled Ethiopia. They occupied the major cities while fighting a constant, brutal guerrilla war. Ethiopian resistance fighters operated from the mountains, relentlessly attacking supply lines, assassinating officials, and making the occupation an impossible hell. When World War II started, Emperor Haile Selassie, who was in exile, made a deal with Britain. Ethiopia would help fight Italy in East Africa. In return, Britain would recognize full Ethiopian sovereignty after the war. In 1941, Italian forces were expelled. Haile Selassie returned in triumph. And unlike every other African nation which had to fight for its independence in the 1950s and 60s, Ethiopia never had to ask for its freedom, because they'd never truly lost it. When African nations gathered to form the Organization of African Unity in 1963, there was only one possible choice for the headquarters: Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital. It was a symbol. Ethiopia represented something every other nation had lost and was fighting to reclaim: unbroken sovereignty, unbroken pride, the living proof that African civilization could stand against any empire. There's a reason Rastafarians worship Haile Selassie as a messiah. There's a reason Pan-Africanists revere Ethiopia as a beacon. The red, gold, and green on dozens of African flags, those are Ethiopia's colors, a tribute to the one kingdom that never knelt. Europe conquered a continent, but they could never conquer the idea that this one African kingdom represented, that some things cannot be taken, only surrendered. And Ethiopia never surrendered. 3,000 years of continuous sovereignty, 0 years under colonial rule. Some kingdoms win by conquering. Ethiopia won by simply refusing to lose. Thanks for watching. If this story inspired you, please like and subscribe for more hidden histories.